Welcome, everyone. It's a new year, and we're so glad to welcome all the new people that are here tonight. It's time to lead our discussion.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Diana. Thank you. Thank you also for hosting this wonderful evening. Of course, a Chag Sameach to everyone. So, I have to say, it feels a little bizarre reflecting on a book that so well describes the Rebbe. Really, Rabbi Allouche does a marvelous job depicting the Rebbe's multifaceted personality. But I want to speak to you today really from a very personal perspective, perspective that I began to build at a very young age. When I met the Rebbe for the first time at the age of 8, I met him altogether 3 times, and the first time I was 8, as mentioned, the second time I was 11, and the third time I was 14. Each of those times, I think because of my age too, was a little bit different, but I have to say that in essence, the feeling was the same. The impact was the same. Because I believe, as you probably noticed in the book, that the Rebbe had a very unique perspective, not just on life, but also on people. They say that there are many thinkers, many philosophers, many leaders that have a very unique perspective on life and on people. But I think the Rebbe had the most unique of all. And to almost compare him to Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud has a book called The Ego and the Id, right? In which he searches the essence of what it means to be a human being, to see what there is inside, so that we know exactly how to channel that humanness inside each and every one of us. The Rebbe also searched. But the Rebbe didn't stop by the id. The Rebbe added one letter. If Freud had continued to dig, he might have found that letter too. In Yiddish, the word for Jew or for Jewish is what? Yid. Yid, with a Y. What the Rebbe found was not just the id. He found the Yid. He found the Jew in each and every one of us. That was his unique perspective. The Rebbe was relentless in his digging. He dug and he dug and he dug until he find that diamond, until he find that Jew, until he find that burning soul in everyone, regardless of who was sitting in front of him. And I think that because he had that perspective, it reflected back on him. When people saw the Rebbe searching within them that diamond, they started to believe in their own diamond. And then they responded with their diamond back to the Rebbe. I think that's the way it is in general. If you treat people with love, they'll respond with love. If you treat people with hatred, they'll respond with hatred. If you treat people with jealousy, they'll respond with jealousy. That's the way it is. Today, in the jargon of the 21st century, they call it karma. But it's really a Jewish idea. It comes from the book of Proverbs, authored by King Solomon, in which he says, Kamayim apanim el apanim ken lev ha'adam el ha'adam. That's the verse which means, just like our faces reflect in water, so too do other people's faces reflect in the way we see them, as if we were searching for them in water, and that same face that is looking at them is the same face that will reflect back at us. The Rebbe was searching for the diamond people, for the light in people, again, for the soul in people, and that face was then reflected back to him, was then unleashed, so to speak, and given new wings, given new powers to fulfill its role in life. I just want to share a personal story, and I want to attach this to the era in which the Rebbe lived, because I think it's important to put people in their historic context. That's what Rabbi Steinsaltz does. I think that's one of the revolutions of the Steinsaltz Talmud, that he takes Talmudic scholars and he says, this is when they lived, this is with whom they lived, this is the challenge, these are the challenges they faced, and then you can understand the perspective much better. But the Rebbe lived in a very specific era, which I want to speak about. First, let me share with you a story of a Rosh Yeshiva, a head of a yeshiva in Har Nof, Jerusalem, who went to see the Rebbe once, and the Rebbe asked him, so you're a wise man, what do you think is the most important limb, or the important organ, or important part of the human body? So without blinking, what do you think that rabbi said? The heart. Okay, good. Or the head, the heart. He said the heart. So the Rebbe said, okay, fine. If it's the heart, Let me ask you another question. What in Judaism is the most important part of the most important side of the human body? For example, when we inaugurate a home, when we fix the mezuzah, we are told afterwards, halakha teaches that you should walk into the house with your right foot. Unless you're a lefty, then it may be different. But the right side, that is usually considered the more important part. I think that's why in English, right is called right. Maybe. In Hebrew, right is called yamin. By the way, yamin in Hebrew also comes from the word man, which means to nourish. That's what nourishes you. That's the side of blessing. So he asked, he asked this great Rosh Hashiva, what's the most important side in the human body? The man said, right. We see this in halakha, in Jewish law. So the Rebbe said, then if that's the case, if you said that the most important part is the heart, and the most important side is the right side, why is the heart on the left side? Shouldn't it be on the right side? Good question. And the Rosh Hashiva said, I don't know. And the Rebbe said, well, I tricked you. The heart is really on the right side. Because your heart is only good if it can feel someone else's heart. And if your heart connects to someone else's heart, then it is really connecting to the right side. Because versus you is a person with his heart on the left side, but it's really your right side. Right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
And therefore it's really on the right side. Your heart is only good if it can connect to another heart. That was the Rebbe's line. But it was, I think, the Rebbe's perspective. My heart, I'm only good if I can connect to someone else. My existence is useless if I live for myself. My existence begins to become purposeful if I live for someone else, if I live to touch hearts. And in a way, and I heard this from Rabbi Steindl himself, when the Rebbe became Rebbe, he almost ceased to exist. It's not that he didn't have a personality. It's not that he didn't have education. It's not that he didn't have so many talents. But what he said to himself is that right now, I'm not living for myself anymore. When he became the leader of the Chabad movement in 1951, he said, that's it. I'm dedicating myself to the Jewish people. That's never about me anymore. That's why I think he never took a day of vacation. That's why he never spoke about himself, but very rarely spoke about himself. That's why he didn't have any sorts of pleasures. Every minute was accounted for the Jewish people. And that's why you have so many stories in which the common denominator between all these stories is what the Rebbe asking, what can I do for that other person, even at 4 o'clock in the morning? Even if that person lives in Honolulu. There was a Jew who once wrote to the Rebbe and said, thank you, Rebbe, for taking care of a small Jew in some island. I forgot where he lived. I think it's in the book. And the Rebbe responded, in my eyes, there's no such thing as a small Jew. But that was his dedication, the dedication that he had for the Jewish people. Now, the era in which the Rebbe lived, beyond that complete sacrifice, some people would sacrifice themselves, yes, but they sacrifice themselves from 9 a.m. till 5 p.m. Or some people sacrifice themselves during the walkable months. But they have a vacation. The Rebbe sacrificed himself in every atom of his life, in every area, at every time. But speaking about the era in which the Rebbe lived, because I think that's also important to understand, the Rebbe lived in an era in which he found himself at the very beginning of this era, 1951, when he assumed the role of becoming the leader of the Chabad movement and I think of the Jewish people. He found himself in a world that was not only devastated spiritually, but it was devastated physically. 6 million Jews had just been murdered. Some were his own family members. His own brother was murdered. His grandparents were murdered. His aunts were murdered in the Holocaust. The Rebbe felt the Holocaust very close to home. But he found himself in this world in 1951, and he said to himself, gosh, not only do I have to revive the spirit of the Jewish people, but I almost have to rebuild it physically. A third of the Jewish people were lost. And the Rebbe assumed this role with not only the tremendous self-sacrifice, but also with the tremendous optimism. An optimism that wasn't found before in the Jewish world. With that optimism, the Rebbe created a revolution in which he said at the very beginning, Judaism, because of this devastation, cannot afford to face inward anymore. Judaism has to face outward. Judaism can't afford to be on the defense. It's what he said in his very first talk. He said the Judaism has to be on the offense. And it's for the Jewish people now to go out to the street, spread the voice of Judaism, the joy, the passion of Judaism as much as possible. And only in that way will we be able to revive not just the spirit, but also give hope to people so that they can give birth again. Give hope to people so that we can rebuild the nation even in its most physical way. That was the era in which the Rebbe lived in. And I think it's connected very, very much. He speaks about it a lot, but the Rebbe, as I told you, very rarely spoke about himself. But I think that in this specific talk, he spoke about himself. And that is a talk that I just discovered a few days ago during the first day of Sukkot. In the portion of Chukat, one of the most bizarre laws in the Torah, one of the most bizarre laws, is a law that even Moses said, it's beyond me, I can't understand it. It's the law that says that if you lived in the times of the temple, you might be familiar with this law, and there was someone who was impure for whatever reason, say he touched a dead body, then how would that person become pure? You would have to take the ashes of a red cow, after slaughtering it, of course, and then mix those ashes with spring water, and then sprinkle that mixture onto the person who became impure. Okay, take the ashes of a red cow, mix it with spring water, and take that mixture and sprinkle it on the person, and he would become pure. A bizarre law, isn't it? It's one of the laws that are called chukim, that cannot be understood. Another law that can't be understood, just to give an example, is, for example, one cannot wear a mixture of wool and linen. Why? It's called shatnez. Why? No one knows. But the Rebbe came and expounded on this law of why does it make sense to take the ashes of a red cow, mix it with spring water, to make someone that's impure pure. The Rebbe said that, it's just so brilliant. When I read it, I myself had goosebumps. The Rebbe said that this is the generation we actually live in. We find ourselves surrounded by ashes. Complete devastation. How can we become pure again? How can we celebrate life again? By taking those ashes and mixing with the spring water that exists within us. If you search within you, you'll find some spring water. You'll find some life. You'll find some soul. Take that soul, bring it to the ashes of your life. And the only response to that devastation is even more life, is even more growth. And when you'll be able to do that, then you'll be able to grow again. Then you'll be able to become pure again. And at the conclusion of that talk, the Rebbe said, that's the mission of our generation. That's the mission of our generation. To go anywhere that we might see some ashes and believe that there's spring water in there, in us, that can revive those ashes, that can ignite that fire within them once again. That's what the Rebbe did. Now, I think because of that, the Rebbe, because of that vision, because of his heart, as we spoke about, and because of his tremendous self-sacrifice, he understood that no opportunity is to be missed. There's ashes everywhere, and every ash has a little bit of spring water. Who knows what that spring water can nourish, can make a blossom. And therefore, I think every Jew in the Rebbe's eye was important. No one was a small Jew, but every Jew was important to the point that every Jew was worth sacrificing ourselves for. I remember meeting one of the great Hasidim of the Rebbe, one of the great disciples of the Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Weinberg in South Africa. His son was in South Africa, and he was a rabbi in South Africa, and we would come and visit him. And he once told us that at 2 o'clock in the morning, one night, he received a call from a woman who was terribly sick, and she was at the hospital, and she had to decide right there and then whether to have surgery or not to have surgery, and she didn't know what to do, and she asked him, since she knew him, to ask the great rabbi at 2 o'clock in the morning what he thought. People would consult with him from all around the world. So he didn't know what to do. He went to his door. The Rebbe's door was locked. He said, I'm not going to bother my Rebbe at 2 o'clock in the morning, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to write down her question. I'm going to slip it under the door. And if the Rebbe's up, he'll answer. If not, then I guess, what can I do? That's what he did. The minute after he slipped that note, he said to himself, gosh, I just realized I'm going to make my own Rebbe, who's elderly now, bend down I can't do that. That's not right. So the next morning, at his first opportunity, when the Rebbe came out to pray, he said, Rebbe, I feel terribly sorry, but I made you bend down. I'm sure you saw the note that slipped under your door. I don't know at what time you saw it. The Rebbe said, I saw it immediately. I replied to that woman already. But, and I don't know what the end of the story was. But you don't have to apologize. But Rebbe, I made you bend down. And the Rebbe said, but don't you know? That's my role in this world. To bend down, to be able to help another Jew. That's my role in this world. To bend down again with that same heart, with the same level of dedication to every ash, to every devastation or slice of devastation that he found in life. That's the era he lived in. So we spoke about the Rebbe's heart, his complete, his I think, statement of, I cease to be right now the channel. Then we spoke about the era in which he lived, and I think that with that approach he was able really to revive our generation and make it face outward, the Judaism face outward. I think that's why also he sent emissaries all around the world. But I want to speak about one third thing that I think not many people speak about when it comes to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, but Rabbi Steinsaltz speaks about that a lot. And Rabbi Steinsaltz actually uses the story, when he speaks about the Rebbe, he uses the classic story of this man who lived in a village, and he was very poor, and he lived in a tiny little place, in a tiny little cabin with his wife and his children, and he had some animals outside, and he just was too stuffy for it. So he came to his rabbi and says, Rabbi, I can't, I need a blessing for livelihood. I can't live in this place anymore. It's too stuffy for me. And you know the story, right? What did the rabbi tell him? Right, bring in the goat. You know, the goat that you have outside, bring him in the house. Fine, the man said, I'll do that. I don't know how that's going to help me. I don't know how that's going to change my livelihood, but I'll do that. After a week, it's even more stuffy. He can't take it. He goes back to the rabbi and says, Rabbi, I can't take this. I don't understand your advice. But it's even more stuffy. I thought livelihood would come from nowhere after it was nothing. The rabbi says, okay, that's fine. You told me you have a cow? Bring in the cow. And he brought in the cow. And at the end, he can't take it. And then the rabbi told him, bring in the other animals. Eventually, he's just exploding. And then he goes back to the rabbi one final time. The rabbi tells him, okay, remember the cow I told you to bring in? Now take it out. Fine, he feels a little more air. After a week, the rabbi tells him, now take out the goat. And after he took out the animals, the man said, oh, I feel like I'm living in a mansion. Life is so much better. But Rabbi Strauss uses that example to describe what the Rebbe wanted to do with every human being. Not just to revive them. That was, again, when he faced devastation, he wanted to revive them. But after he revived the Jew, after he revived the human being, not just Jews, I was in touch with, as the book describes, with leaders from all around the world, and also just the common man from Australia or from Hawaii, it doesn't matter. But what the Rebbe tried to do after infusing that spirit of life in each and every one of us is that he tried to maximize your potential. The Rebbe believed in you more than you believed in yourself. The Rebbe saw in you what you did not see in yourself necessarily. And Rabbi Strauss tells the story in that connection of how once he went to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and shared this on Yom Kippur, and he said, Rebbe, I have too much on my plate. I have the project of the Talmud on my plate. He was then translating the entire Talmud, and then he was on commentary. I have my educational institutions also that I'm trying to run. And I have books. The Rabbi Strauss wrote many books on Jewish faith, over 65 books on Jewish faith. The 13 Petal Rose is a book that we're studying right now at CBT every second week on Wednesday. But that's one of many, many books. And he told her, I just can't take it anymore. What project should I cancel? The Talmud, the educational institutions, or the books? And the Rebbe responded, not only should you cancel one of them, but let me add a fourth one. And the Rebbe asked him to actually be in charge of the educational organizations of Chabad in the land of Israel. And he thought that he could contribute a lot to the curriculum and to the general philosophy of that organization. And of course, if the Rebbe tells you to do something, you do it. So Rabbi Strauss did it. And Rabbi Strauss then says, it's amazing. I thought I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't do 3 projects. When the Rebbe told me to do this 4th project, I discovered things that I didn't know about myself. He tapped into this potential, this infinity within me, that allowed me to do all these 4 projects when I thought I could even do 3. But in a way, that's what the Rebbe did. As a true leader, he didn't just want to revive you with spirit, with new life, but he wanted to make you, the full potential you. And you see that in so many encounters that the Rebbe had with so many people. Rabbi Stans is just one example. I'm going to share with you another example. I have a friend who's a little bit older than me. He's the rabbi of Stanford University, Dov Greenberg. Some of you may have heard of him. He's a close friend, and when he was 14, he also had the privilege of seeing the Rebbe and going by the dollars. You know how the Rebbe would give dollars each and every Sunday. The book speaks about that also. It's interesting, by the way. That's how dedicated the Rebbe was to people, because at one point, he became this world leader, and everyone wanted to come and see him, and he just couldn't. Until the late 70s and beginning of the 80s, the Rebbe would see people all night long for private meetings. They would call them yichidut, private audiences. And sometimes he would stay there until 7 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, seeing people, speaking to people, and giving his all. He wouldn't sleep. But at one point he says, too many people, the line is still on, and I want to be able to see everybody. So he changed the method, and he started giving dollars every Sunday, so that people would come and see maybe for a little less, but they would be able to ask their questions and maybe ask for a blessing and so on. And there would be, I had the privilege, as mentioned, of standing in these lines. Sometimes they lasted 4 hours, 5 hours, and you would stand there just to have 2 minutes with the Rebbe, and he would give you $1, and he would ask for your blessing, and that would be your connection with the Rebbe. But with that method, he was able to see thousands of Jews and other non-Jews also that he wouldn't be able to see with these private audiences. By the way, just it's coming to mind, but do you know why? The Rebbe could have said, I'm going to stand. Could have saved himself and the Chabad movement a lot of money. Because I'm going to stand in one spot. I could even sit in one spot. I have to stand. He was an elderly man. Why stand? Sit in one spot and let people come and see me. Why do I have to give them $1 to charity? I don't know how many thousands of dollars would be given out every Sunday. He would have saved a lot of money. And again, the Rebbe was an elderly man. Why stand? So why stand? An elderly woman once asked the Rebbe, how come, that's in a book, I know, right? And she said, how could you stand for so many hours? Don't you get tired? I'm your age, and I would get tired. And the Rebbe said, no, when you count diamonds, you don't get tired. Okay? The Rebbe was able to see the diamond in others. But why dollars? And that's the brilliance of the Rebbe, and that's the impact he wanted to have on the world. He said, because there can't be a situation in which 2 people meet and a third person doesn't benefit from that meeting. When 2 people meet, something has to come out of that meeting, something positive for the world. So I'll give $1. That $1 will benefit a poor person. And like this, the ripple effect will continue on and on. But that was the Rebbe. But in any case, Dov Greenberg, going back to the Chabad rabbi at Stanford University, at the age of 14, he came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he was then debating. He tells the story often. He was then debating whether to go to high school or to yeshiva, and he said to the Rebbe, high school has better secular studies, yeshiva has better Jewish studies, and I want to be the best at Jewish studies and the best at secular studies. And the Rebbe said to him, well, you can go to a Jewish high school. After school, you can study secular studies, the secular studies you think you missed because you didn't go to secular studies. And then the Rebbe said to him, and I think you should study English too. English. The Rebbe saw that in him. And today he's an author. He writes many things. He has a blog on Facebook or whatever it is. But that, he says, helped him tremendously as a rabbi. The Rebbe was able to see that in a 14-year-old kid. Was able to guide him in that direction, again, maximize his potential. He would do that with everyone. And the level of care that he had while saying that was, I think, unmatchable. But that was the Rebbe. But to summarize, because I do want to open this up to questions, I'm sure you have many, but to summarize, I need a book. To summarize best, I think what the Rebbe stood for in life, you can find that at the end of the book. I think it's just a beautiful description. But in 1941, I remember that's the year, in 1941, the Rebbe arrived to America. And until 1951, he was really in the shadows. He, in fact, in 1950, as you probably read in the book, he didn't want to become the Rebbe. He was a very private man. I think he remained a very private man until his death. What we know about the Rebbe is nothing. It's really nothing. Even though we have books and books about the Rebbe was a very, very private man. But even though he was behind the stages, in the shadows, he still started creating some revolutions. And there was one revolution which I think says it all. And that can be found here. It's told by Zalman Posner, who became the Rebbe's emissary to Nashville, Tennessee. If I can't find it, I'll tell you what he says, but it should be here somewhere. Yes, 1941, page 470 in this book. Yes?
What's in the red book?
The book's on page, you know? Very good. But there's a beautiful story recounted by Zalman Posner, again, who later on became, Alav Shalom, he's passed, but he later on became the Rebbe's representative in Nashville, Tennessee. But he was a yeshiva student then, and this is 1941. Now, this is in the midst of the Holocaust. Just remember, the face of the Jew is buried. It's Jews are even then, even in America, are living, you know, the famous image of Jews coming through Ellis Island and throwing the tefillin off their boat. People wanted to be in this melting pot. They don't want to be too Jewish, God forbid. But here comes the Rebbe, and he sees that each and every year, this is his first year in the United States, he comes to learn that each and every year, the Hasidim of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe would walk on Rosh Hashanah to the local park in order to say Tashlich, in order that park had a pond or whatever it was. And the custom, of course, is to throw our sins into the river on Rosh Hashanah. They would walk to this local park. But when they would walk each by themselves, a little bit maybe shy, walking in public like this, with their hats and jackets and who knows what else, and their books and their sins, or maybe in their pockets, their invisible sins, to be able to throw them. And here comes the Rebbe, who's again, unknown. This is his first United States. People don't know him. This is way before Google. You couldn't Google a guy before that. But here Menachem Mendel comes, and he brings a new spirit. Zalman Posner, I'm just going to read Zalman Posner's words here. So he recalls the great discomfort he felt at the at a time when American Jews were private about their religious behavior, Yeshiva student Zalman Posner recalls the great discomfort he felt at the prospect of singing Jewish songs in public. The root to that is that the Rebbe, when he saw those Jews divided and walking silently to Tashlich towards that park, he said to Zalman Posner and he said to others, why are they walking like this? They should be walking in unison, singing Jewish songs. Again, remember, Judaism now has to face outward. It has to be on the offense. That was the Rebbe's view from the get-go. We are proud to be Jewish. Now, Zalman Posner recalls the great discomfort. In the end, Posner remained a block or two in back of the group, assisting a slow-walking elderly chassid. I think that was a great excuse for him not to join the Jews singing. I'm going to help this elderly chassid. Suddenly, a well-dressed man, by appearances a non-observant Jew, approached Zalman Posner. And he says to him, why are they singing? Why are they singing? He demanded. Before Posner, fearing from the man's insistent tone that he was offended, could respond, the man resumed, do you know that deep down I have a spark? And when I heard these people going down the street singing, it was as if they were saying, hooray, I'm a Jew. And that spark inside me burst into a flame. Zalman Posner thought that he was going to, bury himself in shame. Oh, Jews are singing. That's not what's done in America. I'm sorry. That's not what's done in America. And here he learns the opposite. He saw a non-observant Jew approaching him, and he was about to say, I'm so sorry, but instead the non-observant Jew, because of the Rebbe's act of putting people together and making them sing the song of Judaism, all of a sudden a little spark was ignited. And who knows what that flame in that non-observant Jew's heart continued to do, the impact it continued to have in his life. I think that's what the Rebbe did. Wherever he walked, he sang a Jewish song. And he told Jews, come together, sing together. Don't be afraid. You have a mission. You have a soul within you. You have a potential within you that's divine, that's infinite. Allow it to express itself. Allow it to burst forth. And by doing so, he inspired myriads of people. These little dormant sparks that might have existed in other people, all of a sudden became also a flame. And all of a sudden, we find ourselves, thanks to the Rebbe, in a world full of light. Because one man stood with self-sacrifice, with tremendous love and dedication, with a vision that no one had. No one had during those times of devastation. And with the ability to find the maximum potential in every person and unleash it, he was able to transform the world one Jew at a time, one person at a time, one non-Jew at a time, one person at a time, by making them sing a song and making their little sparks be set ablaze. I want to conclude, and I want to open this up to questions, but with a personal, just a personal anecdote. I shared this, I don't know if in this article about the Rebbe, or I don't read what I write. I really don't.
We read it.
Okay, thank you. No, it's not in this one, but it's something else. A personal anecdote about the Rebbe that in a way transformed my view on people. But I was 4 years old when all of a sudden I had terrible abdominal pains. And my parents didn't know what it was. They took me from doctor to doctor. I remember being in Morocco on vacation visiting my grandmother, and I all of a sudden had these pains once more. And my parents took me to this doctor who gave me 11 injections. 11 injections that didn't help. But I suffered quite a bit because of these abdominal pains that became joint pains eventually. And at one point, my parents, who were close to the Chabad rabbi in Toulouse, France, where we lived at the time, said to the Chabad rabbi, maybe he can write a letter to the Rebbe on our behalf, that their son should get better, that our son should get better. So they wrote a letter. And the Rebbe responded in a very classic manner. He said, I will pray for your son at the grave of my father-in-law, where he would pray, as you read in the book, where he would pray very, very often, where he would read all those letters very often. My situation did not become better. 6 months went by, and I'm still suffering. I'm now like 5 or 6 years old. And so my parents write back to the Rebbe, saying, our son is still not better, please bless him again. And the Rebbe immediately responded, Harei kvar aniti, askir al Tzion. I already responded, I already replied to you, that I will pray at the grave of my father-in-law. Shortly after, they become better, and I find a cure, and Baruch Hashem, everything is good. But I was astonished. Why? Because here I was a 6-year-old boy, living in Toulouse, France, not in Jerusalem, Israel, in Toulouse, France. The Rebbe would receive approximately 1,000 letters every day from Jews all around the world. If you would receive 1,000 letters every day, I'm sure that by the end of the week you would forget the letter that you received on Monday, right? Or the letters that you received on Tuesday. I would forget the letters that I received yesterday. But the Rebbe, 6 months later, still remembered the cry of a lonely 6-year-old child in Toulouse, France. He never forgot it. Yes, he had a photographic memory, no doubt, and it was brilliant. But he remembered because he cared. He cared so profoundly about each and every Jew, even about a lonely child, that he said to the parents, don't worry, I'm here, I'm thinking about him. Yes, yesterday I met the president of Israel, and 2 days ago I met Bill Gates. It doesn't matter. I still remember this little child. With that love, the Rebbe transformed the world. With that vision, the Rebbe changed us. And it's something that we ought to learn from the Rebbe, that sometimes we want to be ourselves, and we have all the rights to be ourselves. We want to say, well, today I'm going on vacation. It's not. The phone calls I get, doesn't matter. Or the cries that I hear, I remain deaf to them. But the Rebbe said, no, sometimes you have to cease to be to exist. It's not about you. It's about the other. It's not about what you want. It's about what God wants from you. That's what life is about. And if we can have just a slice, just an inch of the Rebbe's love, the Rebbe's sacrifice, the Rebbe's vision, then no doubt our world around us and our world altogether will become a Rebbe-like world, a world in which paradise will live once again on planet Earth. I want to open this up to questions, because I'm sure you have many. I don't promise to have any answers, but Elie Wiesel says that it's the questions that unite us, not the answers. So we will unite in question. Yes, Karen? Yes. Us not knowing which mitzvot, and I will add to that. The Rebbe was also of the mind, us not knowing which Jew is more precious in the eyes of God than another. Rabbi Allouche, chief rabbi of Israel, once came to the Rebbe and said, Rebbe, I want to tell you I'm very proud of myself. I'm opening an organization of Kiruv Rechokim. That's where I'm sure you've heard the word Kiruv. Kiruv. You heard the word Kiruv? Usually connotes outreach. It's a word I can't stand because of this story. But Kiruv Rechokim means bringing those that are distant closer. Kiruv. And the Rebbe heard Rabbi Allouche and he said, I'll relate to your mitzvah question, but it's very much connected. The Rebbe heard Rabbi Allouche and he said, what did you say? He said, I'm opening an organization for Kiruv Rechokim, for bringing those that are distant closer. The Rebbe said, what? A third time? He said, I'm opening an organization for Kiruv Rechokim. Then the Rebbe looks at him and says, well, and how do you know who's close and who's distant in the eyes of God? Like, how arrogant is it for you to say, I'm close? I'm bringing people close. Because I know what close is. I'm close. The others are distant. So the distant will become... Who told you? How do you know who's close and who's distant in the eyes of God? I think it's true with mitzvahs too. We don't know how God measures things. For me, doing a small mitzvah for me, for example, putting on tefillin. I've done that since my bar mitzvah. Putting on my tefillin is, okay, it's a mitzvah. For someone else to put on tefillin is like someone a week ago I went to his office. It was the first time he put on tefillin since his bar mitzvah. And he's like 67 now. But for him to put on tefillin, I'm sure that's huge. That's big. He had this refusal within him to put on tefillin for so many years. That's big. It's not, you can't compare that mitzvah. So Hashem looks at the whole equation. And that's what the Rebbe was saying. God is infinite. And at the end of the day, the finite brain can't understand the infinite entity that God is. And not only can we not understand God as this infinite being, but we can't understand how this infinite being also calculates things, how he measures things. There's a great story. I just want to, just to reply to this answer, but it's not about the Rebbe. It's not about the Lubavitcher Rebbe. It's about another Hasidic Rebbe, Rabbi Yitzchak Meir Alter, who was a Ger Rebbe, that he found himself in the same taxi ride, same wagon ride, as the most wicked Jew of his town. Why was he called the most wicked Jew of his town? Because this man was very wealthy, yet he never gave a penny to charity. So this wicked Jew is sitting next to the great Rebbe, and he says to the Rebbe, Rebbe, I have a question for you. It says in the Shema that you say every day, that if you fulfill God's commandments, God will reward you with wealth. If you don't, God will impoverish you. Look at me. I'm the wealthiest Jew in the town. I couldn't care less about God's commandments. So your Shema has a problem over there. And the Rebbe looks at him and he says, well, 1 second. From your words, I can understand that you at least studied that portion in the Torah once in your life. You know what it says. He says, yes. He says, well, do you know what the reward is for a Jew like you to study just one portion in the Torah just once in your life? Much more than the wealth that you have today. That's your reward for such a mitzvah. For you to study Torah, it's much more than the wealth. The reward for that. So we don't know how God measures things. And the Rebbe knew that, and I think that's why the Rebbe also related to every mitzvah and every Jew, for that matter, equally. The Rebbe had, that's right, he called them, it's interesting, that was the Rebbe's view of life. It's beautiful because, there's Hasidic courts, when you compare it to other Hasidic courts or other Jews in general, everyone has their own perspective. The Rebbe called these operations, mifzaim. He had 10 mitzvot that he wanted to change the world with. Tefillin is one of them. Mezuzah is another one. Filling your home with holy books is another one. Tzedakah is one. Candle lighting on Shabbat is another one. 10 mitzvot with which he wanted to change the world. He called them, though, not 10 mitzvot, but he called them 10 operations. Almost like military operations, mifzaim. In fact, he called his own Hasidim soldiers. And he also founded an organization called Chayalei Tzivot Hashem. Soldiers in the army of God. Why? I think that's reflective of the Rebbe's astounding approach. The Rebbe didn't see you just as a follower. The Rebbe saw you as a man with a purpose. You can live life like a sheep. Where are you floating? You just follow the herd. Or you can live life like a soldier. I have a purpose to do today. It's not about me. Soldiers, even if they tire, they still go on that operation. Even if they're not feeling well, it doesn't matter. The commander tells you to do something, you do it. And that's what the Rebbe wanted to do with every human being. Again, to transform them into soldiers. So he called them operations. His terminology was very, very much, very soldier-like, very military. That's right. He didn't look at ashes as ashes. He looked at them as a spring of water hiding in them, like we said before. And he wanted to unleash it. But I'm going to share with you a story that speaks of that. My brother-in-law, some of you have met him, Misha Elvardi. He's married to my sister. But he has an uncle who passed away at a young age, Dani Namdar. There's another story related to Dani Namdar and the Rebbe, which I might share. But Dani Namdar passed away, and he left 4 orphans, 4 little girls. The youngest was 2 years old. And when the Rebbe heard about that, he wrote a beautiful letter to his widow, to Eti Namdar, to my brother-in-law's aunt, if you're following the story, to Danny's wife. Danny, who had passed, he wrote a letter to his wife, Eti. And in that letter, the Rebbe writes something beautiful. He says, he quotes Moshe Lev of Sassov, a Hasidic master, who says, if you're looking for fire, you'll find it in the ashes. And he told Eti, you've experienced ashes in your life, but I haven't given up on your fire. And I want you to fan that fire with acts of goodness, with mitzvot, as much as possible. And you'll find that the fire of your husband will come alive once again. That was the Rebbe's approach. If you're looking for fire, you'll find it even in the ashes. All you have to do is fan it with mitzvot. Add life. Yes. Unfortunately, the Rebbe was very much aware of this problem that he had. This problem that he had, of course, he was viewed as a very, like you said, a very orthodox rabbi. So obviously, I mean, if the Rebbe would have shaved his beard and thrown off his hat, his fedora hat, even though it looked pretty cool, you have to agree. Very Italian, like Michael Jackson type, But if he had thrown out that hat, maybe he would have attracted more people. But first, I'll say this. I would warmly recommend Reform Jews to read a book by a Reform rabbi who was very close to the Rebbe. His name is Herbert Weiner. I have it at home if you want to borrow it. His book is called 9.5 Mystics. And in it he speaks of his many, many meetings with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the Rebbe actually spoke to him about, his being aware of that problem. On the other hand, of course, he had his own principles which he would never break. But I'll say this, that I think that, like we said at the very beginning, the Rebbe dug very deep. Reform, conservative, orthodox, ultra-orthodox were just labels for the Rebbe. He hated those labels. The Rebbe would say time and time again, a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. But I'm going to tell you another story to answer this point. There was a group of young scientists who came to see the Rebbe. And they wanted to ask him, they were asking a bunch of rabbis and religious leaders about some questions that they had about the conflict between, potential conflicts between science and religion. So they were 22, 23-year-olds, and they came to see the Rebbe one day, and the Rebbe could only see them on a Saturday night at 2 o'clock in the morning. Finally, they entered the Rebbe, they asked the questions, and then one of those students, who was Jewish, but that's it, not even Reform, not even Reconstructionist, not just Jewish, unaffiliated, like most Jews in America, unfortunately, he said, I'm going to stump this rabbi. I'm going to ask him a question that he will not be able to answer. Fine, what was the question? He said, Rabbi, in your eyes, am I a good Jew? Now, if the Rebbe would say yes, he was unaffiliated. If he would say no, you can't embarrass a young 23-year-old Jew like this, especially in public. So the Rebbe took it in a whole different direction. I think this was reflective of his approach, and if only Jews could overcome, the external layers of the Rebbe and relate to this brilliant approach the Rebbe had, I think they would find a connection. But the Rebbe said to this young man, he said, "How old are you?" The man said, "I'm 22-year-old. He said, "Wow, I found it quite fascinating. You're 22-year-old, and you find yourself in New York City at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night, speaking to a rabbi about Judaism. I know a lot of people your age that if they would find themselves in New York City on a Saturday night at 2 o'clock in the morning, they wouldn't be speaking to a rabbi about Judaism. So are you a good Jew? At this moment, you are the best Jew that exists on the planet." It was a beautiful way, but I think, of responding to the question, but I think beyond the diplomacy of it, the Rebbe through that answer, I think, conveyed what his message was to the world. He didn't see you as a Reformed Jew. He saw you as a growing Jew. If right now you took a step forward to speak to a rabbi about Judaism at 2 o'clock in the morning in New York City on a Saturday night, you're the best Jew on the planet. It's not where you were a second ago, it's where you are now. And right now, if you're growing, if that Judaism within you is ignited, you're the best Jew. You're even holier than the Lubavitcher Rebbe. You're holier than the holiest Jew. If that's who you are at this moment, that's how he chose to see everyone. And I think when people, even the most remote Jews, heard that from the Rebbe, they connected. Now, yes, it's true that maybe because of these external layers, some Jews didn't relate to him. But yeah, yes, Marty, that's an excellent question. I think to give you the condensed version of this answer, I think it's the difference between power and influence. People of power, once they die, their power dies. People of influence, once they die, their influence only begins. What's the difference between the two? Powerful people, they are powerful because they take power away from you. So think of dictators. They'll take power away from you, and that's how they become more and more powerful. That's how they build the power. But once they die, then the power goes back to the people and it disappears. People of influence don't want to take anything away from you. They want to give you the tools to empower yourself, to become more of a light. And that was the Rebbe. The Rebbe was a man of influence. He didn't want to take power away from you, quite the opposite. He wanted you to be you. Like we said, he wanted you to maximize your potential. Jonathan Sachs put it in a beautiful way. He said the Rebbe, as opposed to many other leaders, he didn't want to create followers. The Rebbe wanted to create leaders. He wanted you to be a leader in your community, a leader in your business, a leader in your social network. Wherever you are, you have a purpose. And I think once you're empowered like that, even when you die, that influence, that empowerment remains within you because you've discovered the leader within you. He just ignited it, and that continues to grow on and on and on. In a way, I'm not going to go there, but there's a Talmudic argument on Hanukkah. Fine, on Hanukkah is coming up soon, and it's interesting because there's a debate between Rav and Shmuel, two Talmudic greats, who asked the question on Hanukkah: if I only have one candle that's already lit, but I have to light 2 candles tonight, can I take from this light and light the other light, or can I not? Rav said you can't, because by taking from the other light, you'll be spilling some of the oil, you'll be diminishing one of the lights. So you can't, you'll just have to be satisfied with one light that night, even though you have to light 2 lights. Shmuel says, of course you could. Because you're not diminishing anything, you're just increasing the light in the world. Some people think that in order for me to be a leader, I have to have a full amount of wax in me. If I give a little bit of myself, if I become a little less territorial, I'll lose my wax. The Rebbe wasn't he didn't follow that opinion. He wasn't Rav, he was Shmuel. He said, no, quite the opposite. If I can teach you how to light the light within you, and through that light, you'll light me, there'll be more light in the world. That's what the Rebbe wanted to do. Yehuda Avner, he's in the book. Yehuda Avner was the consultant to 5 Israeli prime ministers. Mm-hmm. And at one point, I know that's in the book, and he writes about it in his book called The Prime Ministers. But at one point, he asked the Rebbe, what's your purpose? That was one of the few times the Rebbe spoke about himself. The Rebbe said, look, If you look at a candle, all you can see really is a lump of wax and a thread in between, right? When does the candle become a candle? Or in other words, when does a candle fulfill the purpose for which it was created? When it is lit. When you finally attach a flame to that lump of wax and thread. The Rebbe said, that's my purpose in life. Others might see human beings and they see lumps of wax and thread. I try and make them become that candle by igniting the fire. So he asked the Rebbe, did you light my fire? Lubavitcher Rebbe said to Yehuda Avner, no, I didn't light your fire. All I can do is give you the match, but you have to light your fire. And in a way, that's what the Rebbe did. He wanted to ignite the fire. And once you ignite a fire, then that takes a spirit in and of its own. Yes. Yes, Mom. I'll put it this way. I think that for 300 years now, maybe a little more, if you look at Jewish history, the Jewish world has been divided by one question. One question. The Rebbe brought tremendous clarity to that one question. What's the question? How, as Jews, can we engage with the world? You have the school of thought that says you cannot build ghettos, build borough parks, and Williamsburgs and Bnei Braks, enclose yourself in those walls, because the world is too dangerous for your existence, for your spiritual existence. And you find that, again, in all these cities. In Mea Shearim too. Another answer to that question was no, assimilate. The world has a lot to offer. Now it's been emancipated since Napoleon, then let's go. Let's live in the world. Let's enjoy the benefits that we could not enjoy for 2,000 years. On the other hand, you lose your essence. You compromise your own soul by doing so. The Rebbe came with a very unique approach, and that was today. It doesn't sound that unique, but in 1945, after the Second World War, it was tremendously unique. 1941, when he marched in song in those streets, it was unique. The Rebbe said, no, engage with the world, but remain true to yourself. Be within, but stay above. In other words, you are Jewish. And with that Judaism, you can enrich the world. It's not about this melting pot, this assimilation. It's about this symphony where everyone has to have his own instrument. You have the Jewish instrument, go and play it. Others will have their other instrument, they'll play it if they want to also. But we can engage with the world, bring so much to the world if we remain true to ourselves. That's what the Rebbe tried to do. He said to the Jews, go out to the world by spreading the voice of Judaism without shame, without any, fear, without the need to build walls. The opposite. I think it's an answer that has worked very well for the Rebbe and worked very well for the world. Now, of course, many people have copied the Rebbe, emulated. By the way, some of the staunchest enemies of the Rebbe, especially in the ultra-Orthodox world, the Rebbe faced tremendous opposition. They would burn his books. The things that they did are unfathomable. They went to the Lubavitcher Rebbe's grave, to his father-in-law's grave, and they put a pig in it, just to show things that are like unfathomable, like crazy. But the Rebbe persisted, and now those same people are the ones trying to do the same thing that the Rebbe did. The ones who realize that building walls really doesn't help. Well, the only way to really deal with the world is by remaining true to yourself and dealing with it. Yes, Tanya. Oh, Lubavitch comes, you'll tell me, from a city in Belarus, I think, called Luba. Luba.
It's a Russian.
The name of the village. But Luba in Russian means love.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that's what Lubavitch is about.
Is that what Stella is from? Is he from that village?
Yes, originally from that village. He himself was born in Dnipropetrovsk.
Nikolaev.
In Nikolaev. No, he came to the United States in 1941. He left Russia in 1928, if I'm not mistaken.
He went to Germany.
Right. He studied at the university in St. Petersburg,
And Berlin.
then in Berlin,
4 years.
then in Sorbonne,
Yes.
in Paris, yes. The Rebbe worked for, it doesn't say this in the book, I looked, but it does say that he worked for the Navy. He wanted to contribute to the war efforts during the Second World War. But that, by the way, that was the source of the Rebbe's livelihood. The Rebbe invented a patent for the U.S. Army. And from that, he received a paycheck every month. Yes. Look, it's a good question. I'll tell you what Rabbi Stein says, and I remember the acronym he gave. It's like World War I. WWI. The Rebbe was not against universities. I want to clarify that. He wasn't against secular education. He was for it, but under 3 conditions. WWI. When in life, for some people, they should wait after they get married, after they've solidified. The Rebbe once used this example. He said, it's like a tree growing. The most sensitive part of the tree is the root. If the root is rotten, it's not as if the branch is rotten, right? If the branch is rotten, it will grow again. The root is rotten, the whole tree is going to be rotten. So he wanted the roots to be as healthy as possible. So unless the roots weren't fully developed, he would tell you, no, that went, so you should wait. I know personally, though, and by the way, this is, he's in the book, Rabbi Avram Shem Tov. He's the head of the Chabad movement, or at least one branch of the Chabad movement today. His son went to university because the Rebbe told him to go to university. So, but depending on when, that was the first condition. The other condition was who. And not everyone. Even if the when was there, if you were prone to being easily influenced by society, the Rebbe will tell you no. And there's influences in this university, especially towards, the Jewish world, that could be poisonous. But the third point, I think, is the most important point. I don't think the Rebbe believed. The Rebbe was a man who counted every second. The Rebbe's time management was unparalleled. Every second was important to the Rebbe. He knew what he was doing at every second of the day. There's a story when he was in Paris before he emigrated to the United States. He was in Paris and he came to the local shul and he said, what time is the afternoon prayer? And they told him, in 5 or 10 minutes. He said, is it 5 or is it 10 minutes? Because in 5 minutes you can change the world. The Rebbe's every second was counted. Now, the I, the WWI, the I stands for in how long. I think the Rebbe was of the opinion that you can do your university studies in 1 year. 4 years in 1 year. 4 years in 2 years. Maybe not 3 years. Maybe 3 years, sorry. But wasting your time for 4 years, just, semi-partying and semi-studying was not something the Rebbe was a fan of. And I know of someone else who the Rebbe said, you want to go to university, that's fine. You want to learn about Shakespeare and about Spinoza, that's fine also. But you can do that in 1 year. Why waste 4 years? The Rebbe spent 8 years, I think, partially because the Rebbe did other things in university. He wasn't partying. The Rabbi Soloveitchik, who is the founder of Yeshiva University, was with him at the Sorbonne. And there's many stories Rabbi Soloveitchik tells about the Rebbe at the Sorbonne. One of the stories is a story in which the Rebbe would study Torah, actually. He would bring his books of Torah to the classes. And at one point, the professor couldn't take it anymore, and he said to him, stop! What are you doing? Repeat what I just said, from the beginning of my class to now, because you haven't been listening to me not one bit. And the Rebbe repeated word for word what the professor just said. The Rebbe understood how to utilize time the most possible. I think that in 8 years, if you look at the Rebbe's life, I think in the 8 years that he was in university, he didn't just learn engineering, which is what he learned, and chemistry and other things. I think the Rebbe learned the whole Shas, the whole Talmud, the Rebbe many other things. You know that the Rebbe would read 7 newspapers every day, including the New York Times, and many others. 7 newspapers every day. But the Rebbe would be an avid reader. Each time there was an author who came to meet him, had a private audience with him, the Rebbe would read his books before that. How do you do that? Man, that's so busy. How does he do that? I think the Rebbe would have found the time to learn what he learned at the university for 8 years. It would have been maybe a little more difficult, but he would have found that time to do it. Because of his mind, he would have done it. But I think the in how long is the key to those 3 things. Yes. No, you're right. Look, I think the Rebbe was one of the first women advocates. I think he was the real founder of the Me Too movement. I really do. I just met, some of you may know him, Marty Peer. Just to tell you another story about the Rebbe, but Marty Peer has a son called Ian Pear. He was sitting Shiva for his father here not long ago. Ian Pear's in-laws came to pay him a visit during Shiva, and his father-in-law was the Attorney General of the state of New York, and his mother-in-law was one of the first woman advocates in the 60s. And the Rebbe was tremendously, she was telling me during Shiva how the Rebbe was encouraging her to publish a journal about women's rights. The Rebbe was actually telling her also to create an organization for women, because the Jewish world almost had no organization for women besides Hadassah Women's Organization. Barely had anything. And she created a women organization, I forget the name. One of the things that she told me, though, that shows another side of the Rebbe, which we didn't speak about too much, but at the age of 49, she was 49 years old, and she came during the holidays, during Sukkot. She came to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe gave her a piece of honey cake to wish her a happy and sweet year. And he said to her, she was 49 years old, her name is Diana Abrams. She's in the book.
Yes.
Yes, that's right. And the Rebbe said to her, you should have an addition to your family this year. 2 weeks later, she became pregnant.
First child.
Yes, amazing. At the age of 49 years old. And so we just met her just a few weeks ago. Interesting story. Yes, Kila. For the followers of the Rebbe, there would be a different situation. For the world, it would be different. The Rebbe was restless. We spoke about this. The Rebbe kept on adding. Bring the goat in, bring the cow in, bring this in. I think therefore there would be much less politics in the Jewish world today. I think the reason for politics, bad politics, the reason for all the gossip that we hear in the Jewish world today is simply because people are bored. If people would be purpose-oriented, if they would really give themselves to a cause, to a noble cause, they wouldn't have time for all this garbage. The Rebbe knew that. And I think that's part of the reason the Rebbe kept giving us missions, operations, like we said before. He wouldn't let us breathe. And that crushed boredom, and it crushed all the curses that come with boredom. So I think the Jewish world would be much more purpose-oriented if the Rebbe was alive today. Thank God he left us still many operations to fulfill, but I think that would probably be one of the most subtle differences in the Jewish world today. I think that also the Rebbe believes, that's also in the book, the Rebbe believed that we're the last generation, that the Messiah is coming. As far-fetched as it is to state that, but you know, one of the 13 principles of Maimonides, who was probably the most rational Jew alive, is one of the most irrational principles, and that is that the Messiah is coming, and there will be a time in which peace will reign in the world. The Rebbe thought that we're getting closer and closer to this time, and I think we would feel that more today. The Rebbe spoke about it a lot, and when he lived, people were preparing for those times. Today, I don't feel that as much. Yes, please. That's beautiful. I will say this. I just want to add to this. You said the book Toward a Meaningful Life. It's just interesting. Do you know what the word for meaning is in Hebrew? Mashma'ut. By the way, that has an Hebrew translation, and the book in Hebrew is called the Derech HaChaim Shel Mashma'ut. Mashma'ut also comes from the word hearing. And the Rebbe points this out, by the way. And he says, how do you achieve meaning in life? By listening. Listening to what God wants from you, listening to each other, listening to what the world needs from you. Yes, Yannick. It's an incredible book. And I have to tell you, speaking about the barriers between Jews, the one who helped tremendously writing it, Simon Jacobson told me this, Rabbi Jacobson, and I know very well, I'm very friendly with his brother Yossi Jacobson, but he said I couldn't write this book without a man named Stephen Dubner, who's an economist, Free Economics, you know, you heard about that book, and so he wrote it. He was the editor of, I don't know if he still is, of the New York Times magazine. Stephen Dubner also wrote a book called The Turbulent Soul. Turbulent Soul is about, did you do it in the book club? No. It's about his own life journey. He was raised a Catholic. Yeah. And he all of a sudden discovered as an adult that he's Jewish. And that his parents had converted to Catholicism. Anyway, that's the Jew he is. And he's the one who collaborated with Simon Jacobson to write this book. So you see the wonders of the Rebbe, breaking barriers. Yes, Michelle. No doubt.
It's not personally.
No doubt. Look.
As you know it.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the soul of the Rebbe is very much alive. There's no doubt about that in my mind. Not just the influence that we spoke about, power of influence is there, and no doubt, the Chabad movement is growing and so on. But the soul of the Rebbe, we believe in the soul, right? Jews believe in there's the body and the soul. This body dies, the soul doesn't die. The soul of the Rebbe is very much alive, and I can tell you tens of stories about people who've been affected by the Rebbe until this very day. There's the custom of going to a person's grave and praying at a person's grave so that person, that's the soul of that person, can evoke compassion in the upper worlds on behalf of us. And there are many stories if you go to the Rebbe's grave in New York, in Queens, New York, you'll see that there's people there all the time. I've been there at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'll be there in the middle of the day. There's people there all the time. Because we really believe that the Rebbe, in a way, still communicates with this world, of course, as we believe it Kabbalistically through his grave. His soul continues to communicate with us. But I'll tell you a story, just to illustrate this point. I have a friend who's the Chabad rabbi of Tallahassee, Florida, and about 10 years ago, he was in complete debts. He couldn't continue to run his Chabad operations there. So he went to the Rebbe's grave, and he said to the Rebbe, look, I'm trying to be your loyal emissary, but the bank won't even accept my signature anymore. I can't continue. So help me out. He prayed, he poured out his heart. Now, if you've been to the Rebbe's grave, you know that there's a big tent there, and then you can sit down, take out a few books, and study. So he went, he prayed, he sat down, and he studied. And all of a sudden, I'm not making this up, all of a sudden someone comes to him and says, excuse me, are you a Chabad rabbi? He says, yes, I actually happen to be the Chabad rabbi of Tallahassee, Florida. He says, good. I'm looking for a Chabad rabbi somewhere in the United States because I just made a promise to the Rebbe that if he helps me with this business deal right now, blesses me up there, then I'll be supporting a Chabad rabbi for the entire year. Can I support you? He had just prayed that. He had just asked for that. And it happened. Now you can say, well, I don't believe it, it's coincidence, this and that. But when you add the dots, 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, you'll realize that the Rebbe's influence is still, if that's the type of influence you were speaking about, that soul is still very much alive. The Rebbe, no doubt. I'll tell you a very personal story that I haven't shared, but since we're opening up. I at the age of 16, I had my own little theological crisis. And, I had a lot of questions. And I had a dream. In that dream, I saw the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he was there giving a Farbrengen, which is one of the pictures that you have there, where he sat on that long, wide table in front of thousands of his students. And then I find myself among this huge crowd. And this is my dream. And the Rebbe then calls me. And he smiles at me, he says, come here. Fine. All of a sudden, I'm transported to the Rebbe. And then the Rebbe doesn't say a word. But he continues to smile, he turns around, and behind him there's the verse from the Torah that says, Daber b'nei Yisrael ve'Yisau, speak to the Jewish people and let them go forth. This verse comes from the splitting of the Red Sea, where the Jews didn't know what to do. The Egyptians were running after them. They were confused. What are we going to do? Should we surrender? Should we commit suicide, drown in the sea? What should we do? And God came to them and said, just continue. March forward. Stop thinking too much. March forward. And they marched forward and the sea split. So the Rebbe goes like this to me, and I see this verse, and he says, so what are you waiting for? And I woke up. And that changed my life. It changed my life. The Rebbe passed by that time, but still, see, the Rebbe's soul is very much alive. It's a lesson in life. Sometimes we're so confused, but we're action-based. We have to be purpose-based. I like to say it's not a feel-good religion, it's a do-good religion, right? Larry. Right. It's a good question. It's an excellent question. I think the Rebbe was a very, very private man. He was a very humble man. Very humble, very private. And he knew that becoming a Rebbe would mean exposing himself to the world, which he didn't want. He wasn't searching for the limelight. By the way, it's reminiscent of the true leaders. The first, right, Moses also. the burning bush, God tells him, go and lead the Jewish people. He says, no, I can't. He says, but you go lead. He says, no, I'm a stutterer. I'm not going to be able to speak. Just go lead anyway. Aaron will help you. He says, but who am I? God gets angry at Moses. But I think it's the humility. It's a combination of humility and this deep privacy that translate into reluctance. On the other hand, it's specifically those leaders that become the best leaders. Why? Because they were never in it for themselves. They were in it for the great purpose, because God spoke to them. And then they become those ultimate channels to the world, to godliness for the world. Which is what the Rebbe was, yeah.
Rabbi, Joseph Telushkin said,
Yes.
after writing this book, he said, I'm a happier and a more spiritual person as a result of writing this book. I think those of us in the room are happier and more spiritual from having read the book, but mostly we're more spiritual and happier from your discussion.
Oh, please. Thank you. And thank you, Karen and Robert. Thank you.